lots of updates from folks who are doing riparian restoration work to hear sort of what they've been up to recently and what we're looking forward to in the next year. So I think it'll be really fun, really exciting, lots of opportunity to hear from lots of different folks. You'll see, I think we have at least 10 different people who will be speaking, maybe more like 15 throughout the course of the next couple of hours. And then later today, we'll have a session with the DEC on the Act 76 rollout, and then we have three really fun sessions tomorrow on species-specific management of riparian buffers and on innovative approaches both to restoration and to outreach. So I hope that you guys can make it to whichever of those sound interesting to you. Okay, Annalise, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Allison. Good morning, everyone. I first just want to share a big thanks to Allison and the new UVM Watershed Forestry Partnership for really taking the lead on organizing this winter's meeting. That's no small lift. And like Allison said, I'm Annalise Carrington. I work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program in a partnership with the Interville Center. And I've helped coordinate this growing network of riparian partners the last couple of years. So I just wanted to share some brief reflections before we get started that I hope will provide some context to those of you newer to this network and some continuity for those of you that have been engaged the last few years. So this year marks our third annual winter meeting of riparian practitioners in Vermont. Looks to be our largest yet, and it's been really exciting to see this network grow the last few years in a way that really embodies a holistic approach to how we're thinking about riparian buffer work here and the practice of riparian restoration. And to see just in the last 2 or 3 years, new partnerships form around this work. And I, for one, have really appreciated the collaborative information sharing that is possible when you bring together such a diverse group of partners who come to this work thinking about a whole host of things, from wildlife habitat and connectivity to water quality to flood resiliency and floodplain work to carbon sequestration and agroforestry and education and outreach. So it has felt like that diversity has really created some powerful momentum around this work the last few years. And just to provide a little more history for how far we've come as a community of practice, I was talking with Chris Smith last week, who's my boss and the state coordinator for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. And not to date him, I don't know if he's tuned in yet, but he was remembering how it wasn't really until the early 90s that the Partners program first started planting trees and buffers in Vermont in the name of riparian restoration, and how new that practice was at the time. And then it wasn't until the early mid 2000s when enough trees were being planted by a growing set of partners around the state that this network started to coalesce, and people started to wonder how all of those trees were doing. And that was what instigated the monitoring work that my predecessor, Leah Safransky, and others started back in 2007, 2008, which was really the first robust long-term monitoring effort in the state that was looking at growth and survival of planted trees and shrubs and progress at these restoration sites. And having that data was so vital to be able to start thinking about best practices and adaptive management with this work. And then it was my first summer with the Partners program in 2018 that we completed the 10th year of that monitoring effort. And that was the impetus for pulling together that winter meeting in 2019 that we called the Vermont Tree Planting Partners Meeting. It was the first annual to share those results And more than that, to really dig into what had been working, what wasn't working, what are the challenges that we're facing with implementation with riparian buffer work, and how do we start to overcome those and adapt our practices, and really critically thinking about the resources that we need to make that happen in terms of programmatic support and funding and partnership opportunities. And of course, that's the conversation that we're continuing this winter, today and tomorrow. Having come a long way from those early days in the 90s, and recognizing that this work really does involve so much more than just planting a tree. Hence the super dynamic agenda that we have ahead of us. And the last thing that I wanted to share, some of you might be aware that this year, 2021, marks the start of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which they're calling a rallying call for the protection and restoration of vital ecosystems around the world, really recognizing that functioning ecosystems are needed to, in their words, enhance people's livelihoods, counteract climate change, and stop the collapse of biodiversity, which is a daunting call to action, but I've also found really inspiring in thinking about the work that we're doing, not just in the context of Vermont or the Champlain Valley or the Northeast, but really in alignment with this larger global effort. So with all of that, I'm really excited to reconnect with all of you today, a lot of familiar faces and some new names, and to dig into the rest of this meeting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annalise. That was some really helpful background and sort of positioning this work in a greater global context, which I really appreciate. We have, like I said, a lot of updates from partners. I think the session is going to be really fun. Part of staying connected as a community of practice is understanding what the other folks doing similar work have been up to. And so we've got a number of updates from partners, some longer updates, and then some shorter updates from folks who signed up for the next couple of hours. And yeah, we'll jump right into that. If you have slides to share, please go ahead and share your screen, and then when you're done, you can stop sharing so the next person can share. But we'll jump right into that. So first up, we have Lynn Munno from Watersheds United Vermont, and she'll be accompanied by Michelle Brown from Friends of the Winooski River. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I didn't know I was going first, so let me just pull up the slides. Hold on. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And yeah, so my name is Lynn Munno. I'm the director of Watersheds United Vermont. It's so nice to see everybody's names on the list. And I was just texting with Michelle this morning about our memory of being up at the North Branch Nature Center up the road from me last year. So I'm going to just briefly share about two funding programs that we administer to help watershed groups develop and implement riparian buffer planting programs in Vermont. Oh, you know what I'm going to do? Let me put this in slide mode. There we go. And as you'll hear from folks throughout the day, and as you all know as practitioners, watershed groups plant thousands of trees and shrubs each year to restore riparian buffers across Vermont. And groups work with landowners, partners, and often pull together multiple funding sources to implement these buffer planting projects. And Watersheds United Vermont, WUV, is fortunate enough to have two sub-grant opportunities to help watershed groups with their planting efforts. The first is DEC's Woody Buffer Block Grant program, which is through the Clean Water Investment Program. And the other is through private funding from Pure Projet. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of these two programs and the quick look back at the plantings that were done in 2020 and then looking ahead to 2021. And then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to give kind of a fuller picture of what an individual watershed group's buffer planting program looks like. So first, the DEC Woody Buffer Block Grant. The purpose of this funding program is to sub-grant funds to watershed groups. And I'm just going to say, you're going to hear later from Holden with the conservation districts, and many of the programs that we have, both of these programs that we have for watershed groups, Holden runs parallel programs for the conservation districts. So I'm saying watershed groups, but conservation districts are also doing this work, just with a different funding umbrella organization. So again, to support high quality native woody riparian buffers, we've had 2 rounds of funding. The first was round 1, spring of 2019 through the fall of 2020. And we had approximately $132,000. And this was for groups to both develop woody buffer projects and also for the implementation of those projects. And now we're in round 2. It's the fall of 2020 through the spring of 2020. Oh, sorry, that says 2021. It's actually through the spring of 2022. And we have approximately $167,000, and that's for buffer planting implementation. And I'll talk a little bit later about how the project development funding will work over this next year or 2. So look back on what happened in 2020, which I'm kind of amazed looking at these numbers, because as we were having conversations a year ago, I think we all weren't sure whether any plantings were going to happen in 2020, given the timing of when the pandemic hit and such uncertainty around the restrictions. So looking at these numbers is sort of even more impressive to me, given the context. So 6 watershed groups received funding through the Woody Buffer Block Grant last year: Friends of the Winooski, the Missisquoi River Basin Association, Connecticut River Conservancy, the Passumpsic Valley Land Trust, White River Partnership, and the Friends of the Mad River. And those groups planted 16 sites using this funding, 22.5 acres and over 8,000 stems. And again, also developed plantings to be used for last year, this year, and coming years. So looking ahead to 2021, we have even more ambitious plans from the watershed organizations with the Woody Buffer Block Grant funding. It's also allocated to 6 watershed groups at this time, with the same groups, with the addition of the Lewis Creek Association planning some plantings this year, which is great. And the Friends of the Mad River is still engaged, but likely will be doing plantings in 2022 and not in 2021. So these groups have 21 planting sites planned for this next year. That's for spring and fall, 49 acres that they plan to plant. And again, as I mentioned, the project development funding is no longer through this Woody Buffer Block Grant, but through a different block grant that WUV and the conservation districts and actually the Northwest Regional Planning Commission hold, which is the Project Development Block Grant. And we have allocated some of that funding already, but actually do still have some funds available for planting and other, for riparian buffer planting and also other project development work. So if that's something that's of interest to folks, they can reach out directly to me. And I'm working with Christian, and I should thank Christian for helping to put together the photos and text for these slides. And he works for the White River Partnership and is helping WUV administer these block grants. And then I just wanted to sort of briefly talk about our other planting program, which is through the company Pure Projet. And Pure Projet is a private organization that works with companies to support targeted areas for tree planting around the world. We are exceptionally fortunate that one of their target areas is the state of Vermont. And they had started out working several years ago with the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District and have extended to now work directly with the conservation districts and Watersheds United Vermont. And the funds are to, again, subgrant to watershed organizations to support tree plantings focused on farms and other private landowners for climate change mitigation, water quality improvements, and habitat benefits. As Annalise was talking about, that whole sort of range of co-benefits that we're looking for with riparian buffer planting. And another important aspect of the Pure Projet funding is that the dollars can also be used to monitor and must be used to monitor sites over 2 years after the initial planting and to replace trees if the survivorship falls below 75%. And it has been really great to have money for that monitoring and maintenance work. And so just one last slide, just looking at the 2020 and 2021 projects through Pure Projet, Red Start Natural Resources Management organization to do plantings through these Pure Projet dollars. They planted 14 sites and 13,022 stems were planted, which is pretty amazing. Looking ahead to 2021, because these are private companies, COVID has had a pretty significant impact on the economics of the companies that provide funding for this tree planting. So we have a reduced scale for 2021 and then hoping to ramp back up in 2022 and beyond. But still, Pure Projet has been able to secure funding to support at least 2,000 trees for WOV and similar amounts for the other funding partners. And so because of the more limited dollars, we're prioritizing sites that could not be planted without Pure Projet dollars through this next year. So I know that was kind of a rapid fire overview of those programs. And I'll turn it over to Michelle to talk more specifically about what that looks like for a single watershed organization.
Lynn, so I don't have slides, but I'm going to share a nice picture of one of our riparian planting sites. This is 2 years after it was planted, and it's looking lovely. You can see a little bit of the Dog River there in the corner. I want to start with a recognition of our project manager, Sean White, who has done an amazing job of stepping up to manage our entire planting program. And in addition to riparian buffer planting, this year we also have a lawn to forest program funded by the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And we are launching a Lakeshore Education and Action Program through Sea Grant on the model that Poultney-Meadowy Natural Resource Conservation District has developed. So we are working with 12 different funding sources this year. And so I just want to describe for folks kind of that crazy quilt of how that comes together. The plants for our riparian planting cost about $5.60 each on average. This year we have 5 riparian planting sites, and Partners for Wildlife program at U.S. Fish and Wildlife will participate in all 5 of those sites and pay half the cost of the plants. So that's about $2.80 on average per plant. We estimate our staff time and mileage expenses at about 50% of the plant costs. So our total per plant cost on average overall is $8.50 per site. We are planting 4,755 plants this year on 12.5 acres. That only comes out to 380 stems per acre because 2 of those sites were partially planted last year, and we're just filling in this year with more plants. So on one site, we're combining Watersheds United Vermont funding with Partners for Wildlife funding. And the town, in that case, also purchased some elm trees for the site. And then volunteer labor is an in-kind donation. On another site, we're combining Watersheds United Vermont funding plus Partners for Wildlife funding, and hopefully some Pure Projet funding. We are really grateful to have Paul's commitment to planting in Vermont because those funds can be used over a couple of years to do stewardship work on the sites. And we have one site that has a permit that requires monitoring for 3 years. So we're really glad to have the financial support to be able to do some of that. We also have support for stewardship from Annalise, who spoke earlier, which is fantastic. We have another site that is a special case. They do not want to be visited by anyone from the state of Vermont, so we can't do a landowner agreement with them for the Watersheds United Vermont funding. So that site will have just Partners for Wildlife funding, pure projet funding, without which we could not plant this site at all. So we're very glad to have that, and funding from 350 Vermont. Pure projet will give us $5 per tree. 350 Vermont will give us $4 per tree. Katie at Partners for Wildlife will pay $2.80 per tree, roughly. So the total cost of planting that site is a little over $12,000. And given the way the funding works, Pure Projet will pay for half the trees at their rate. 350 Vermont will pay for half the trees at their rate. Their funding specifies they can only plant trees that you can walk under, not shrubs. So the combined revenue that we have available for that site is just under $12,000. So we've also applied for a watershed grant to cover that shortfall, as well as to provide matching funds for the Lawn to Forest and Lakeshore programs. And 2 of our sites are Vermont Land Trust sites. One is owned by the Land Trust, one has an easement from the Land Trust, and they have brought to that a NIFWIF grant. So a total of 11 funding sources in hand, hopefully a watershed grant to be the 12th funding source to make all of this work out. We're just glad we get to plant this year, because last year, we always plant with volunteers. Last year we hired the Intervale. I'm really glad they were available and that WAV was flexible about the funding and we were able to pay for that. But we are very glad to be able to get volunteers back out planting trees this year. Thanks, Allison.
Thanks so much, Lynn and Michelle. Really appreciate those updates. I think it might make sense to do the updates, and then if folks have questions, we can do them all at the end of this block of updates rather than going back and forth. So if you have questions, hold them or type them in the chat and we'll come back to them. Next up, we'll have Holden Sparacino with the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. Holden.
Hi, everyone. I appreciate the sentiments of missing last year meeting in person. I hope to get some time to actually chat, one-on-one or maybe during lunches or something with some of you. As Lynn and Michelle said, some of our programs, so conservation districts, the main program that I'm going to talk about is Trees for Streams, and this is funded also through the Department of Environmental Conservation and Pure Projet. In addition, it's also funded through the Lake Champlain Basin program. We also get a lot of support through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Partners for Fish and Wildlife. And the individual conservation districts often get match or support from landowners, local towns, local organizations, often hire Intervale crews or other organizations to conduct the work. So this year we are planning about 21 acres across 13 sites. So on average, the sites are 1 to 2 acres. That seems to be the sweet spot for us as far as big enough to be cost effective, but small enough to be able to fit in these plantings where they make sense. We also funded last year I think it was about 10 to 13 sites for project development work. So those sites will be implemented either this year or in future years as funding comes down the line. We continue to apply for funding through DEC, through Pure Projet. There may be some funding available, as Lynn mentioned, being funded through private organizations. They've been hit a little bit harder because of COVID-19. So looking to see if there's plantings that we can supplement or implement maybe in the fall, funded through Pure Projet. And then Lake Champlain Basin Program, we're reaching the end of a funding cycle currently, but have applied for future funding that would go online for either this fall or next year. So with those three funding sources, as well as partner support, we find it really effective to ask conservation districts. So 14 conservation districts all throughout the state are eligible and apply to these planting funds. And we try to match the funding source or sources that make sense most for the planting. Sometimes, like Lake Champlain Basin Program, it's more geographically focused where the planting is. In terms of DEC or Pure Projet, it might depend on the site characteristics and if long-term monitoring is possible with Pure Projet especially. So with existing plantings, we're also supporting currently 19 plantings that have been implemented in past years through long-term monitoring, maintenance, and stem replacement, and that is possible through Pure Projet's support. And I would estimate, I didn't run the numbers exactly, but I would estimate about half of our plantings exist within the Lake Champlain Basin, within the Lake Champlain Basin, and the other half are throughout the rest of the state. We still see challenges for long-term maintenance funding, both in eligible costs and just funding support. We applied for a federal grant last year to support long-term maintenance. Did not get that grant, but we're looking at other methods we're really grateful for Pure Projet's support, but with the size of some of these programs, it's not feasible to support every planting through a single funder. So we are looking to continue to supplement long-term maintenance, hoping that, through Act 76, for example, long-term maintenance activities may be more eligible through state funding in future years. And we have seen some of the challenges, especially that Michelle talked about, with transferring from volunteer crews to paid crews for implementation last year. And I suspect that this year there will be some of that as well. That has increased some costs, so we did have to do a little bit of budgeting to make sure that we can meet our grant deliverables while matching the real world cost increases, and finding high quality native species stems to support these plantings continues to be an issue, and I know there's a talk scheduled specifically about that, so I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more. But yeah, that's kind of a summary for us. Hoping to hear from all of you and learn more about opportunities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Holden. I really appreciate that update. Next up, we have Ben Gabos with NRCS. And Katie, I'm not sure if you're with Ben or next, but one or the other.
A little bit of both.
Perfect. Is Ben?
Okay. Is the PowerPoint showing up? Oh, hold on. I'll get there.
It's showing
Can you
up.
tell me? It is?
Yep.
Okay. Slideshow. So, okay. So yeah, I guess we were asked to sort of just do an overview of the projects we have working this year. And if you don't, I'll introduce the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, I guess, which some know is sort of on a hiatus for a few years because of changes to the Code of Federal Regulations that didn't allow prep in states that had regulations and resource conserving rules along surface waters. So the RAPs were the issue that we had conflict with, and specifically the buffer setbacks required on cropland, which they sort of holistically applied to everything, not just cropland. But so we finally worked through. We have a process going now where every single project we do has to get sent to the national office at Farm Service Agency. And we've got 3 projects through that we can actually plant this spring. So those are the 3 we're going to review. And to back up, CREP is a sort of a joint program basically between the USDA Farm Service Agency and the State of Vermont Agency of Ag. We have an MOU, and it's been in place for probably since the early 90s, 92 I think. And basically the Conservation Reserve Program gets an E added for enhancement when the state, basically we provide upfront incentive payments to make the program more attractive, and we have a 15-year agreement that tacks on to the federal 15-year contract to take land out of production, agricultural land out of production, and plant buffers. Primarily what we do is riparian forest buffers. In the past, it's still eligible, our grass filter strips, grass waterways, and smaller wetland restoration projects. But in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, primarily what we're doing is riparian forest buffers. And again, the landowner signs a 15-year contract with FSA and the state of Vermont, and as mentioned, PFW, the Department of Fish and Wildlife of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is also has an agreement with the landowner. The cost share to plant the buffers is basically 90% through the Farm Service Agency, and then PFW covers the other 10. And then in addition, the landowner is getting an annual rental payment from FSA to, for compensation for taking that land out of production. So they not only get the buffer planted for no cost to them, but also get a rental payment. Again, this is for agricultural land coming out of production. And we have projects, of course, that if there's other practices to make the buffer possible, like fencing, so, we have a livestock farm, we have fencing to exclude the buffer from livestock, pipeline water tubs to provide alternative water sources for the herd, and stream crossings, and water source if we need to put in a dug well or spring development. Those are some other things that landowners can also get 100% cost share. So it can work really well for a lot of livestock operations, particularly ones, trying to do rotational grazing. So we use that as a selling point. I think that covers CREP. If people have more questions about the program in general, we can ask after. So the 3 projects we have this year, which we did get through the national office vetting process, are all related to also Vermont Land Trust is another partner organization we do work a lot with, because when they're conserving farms last 3 to 5 years, they're requiring part of their Vermont Housing Conservation Board funding requirements, and just general policy in BLTs that buffers are, riparian buffer zones are maintained and installed and on all their projects. Generally, they're 50-foot on larger streams and rivers for the most part. And those basically are part of their easement. They're required to have that in the easement to maintain those as not where agriculture is precluded basically. So for CREP to be eligible for all those projects, we have to get them into a contract, close on the contract prior to them selling the development rights to Vermont Land Trust. So 2 of these projects are basically just the sale of development rights. They're conserving the farm. And then the last one was the farm has been in the land trust for a long time, but they were approached to do a river corridor easement by the land trust. And so again, we're doing the same thing. We're doing CREP first, and then they closed on a river corridor easement, which basically is through DEC funding. they're selling their channel management rights to let the river migrate in the set corridor. So over time, it'll achieve more of a equilibrium plan form or shape. So anyway, so those are the 3 projects and why we're sort of involved. First one is in Moncton, trip to Little Otter. It's hard to, I don't have I just have the acreage on here. This was a 9-acre site that was conserved and then subsequently transferred to the new owner. So a lot of paperwork, but he's a crop farmer. He does soybeans. He's done corn in the past. Also hay. It's a mix, as you can see from the image. He's primarily going to slowly move to pretty much all hay, I think, but the land use at the time was a mix of, there was like a fallow field. Here's a shot of, what that looked like. Field with soybeans, and you'll see some buckthorn here. There's a lot of that on this site. We'll get to that in a minute, and honeysuckle. And another site with hay. So all the different kind of land uses on this particular project. No pasture, and this is the channel. It's just unnamed trib to Little Otter, pretty much channelized with a thin forested buffer on it. It gets from silty bed down to actually some stone, rocks. But the most of the canopy is buckthorn and honeysuckle with some nice oaks here and there, and some great dogwood. There's a lot of great dogwood here in down in Addison County, and this site in particular a lot, and as well a lot of reed canary. So that's another challenge of this site. This is just another shot of the stream channel with the crop field, kind of just showing with the yellow line is right outside of it. So a narrow, really not much of a buffer here. And in this case, VLT wants to get them out to 50 foot on this. So another shot of the stream channel with all the honeysuckle, and there's more buckthorn in the background. This is a big buckthorn here. This is the planting plan. It's kind of neat that we're going to get some hackberry out there, swamp white oak, tamarack, which really we're not, see a lot of in this area, but we're using that a lot these days just because it's resilient. It doesn't get browsed by deer, which has become a big problem, and the pine. So a lot of our favorites here. And since there's so much gray dogwood there, we're planting a lot more of that, but also silky. Let's see. To deal with, basically we have, 5 acres of buckthorn and honeysuckle in the interior of this site. We're doing like a 3-year treatment plan with a contractor to do cut stump and then also foliar targeted to basically get those honeysuckle, buckthorn, and there's also a lot of multiflora rose as well, treated. And again, it's going to be staggered so that there's like 3 years, but with a year in between off to let seedlings come in, and we'll hopefully get those as well. So that's the first project. Then we move down to Orwell. This is in the headwaters of the Lemon Fair, which flows to the north from here. This is another farm that's basically, will be closing their conservation easement pretty soon here. This has been years in the making. I was first out here in 2017. And CREP was on hold. It's taken this long to get the project together because there are a lot of water quality issues that had to be addressed in order for them to conserve. Particularly, there was a manure management manure system that had to be installed through the Agency of Ag, and a CREP contract is going to address all the access to surface water issues that were there. So as you can see, there's, along with the forested buffer here, there's also fence, pipeline tubs, some stream crossings. And it was kind of unique here that we had a sub parcel within the farm that had been sold off. So we had to, using equip to get fence across that to keep the cows out of the stream. So we have some equip funding there. And then we're also used the agency's pasture surface water fence program to deal with a big culvert on the main stem here that would have been too hard to deal with CREP bureaucracy. So this is looking north on the main stem of Lemon Fair. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's Annalise. That was yeah, back when she was working out of the Middlebury office. Again, this site, there's also a lot of reed canary grass. This is basically the pasture. It's all pasture here. The land use, you can see. And looking south from that main crossing, pretty wet pasture, hugged up. This is in the summer, similar location, you know, just a lot of access to the main channel here for watering. There's another small trip to the main stem with a crossing that we were, you know, doing some measurements on to come up with the design, basically a Ford crossing here. And here's just a quick shot of installed this past winter. Was done in November, the stream crossing, and the fence was just done in January, or actually into February, sorry. So this is another sort of typical shot of this project. Pretty wet pasture, pretty beaten up, overgrazed and plugged up. But there'll be a 50-foot buffer on all this. And this is the selection of trees we're planting here. Glad that we could get some alders for this site. That's great. And a lot of willow, swamp white oak. There are shagbark hickory in the area, so we couldn't get any of those, I think. So, but they'll come in over time. Let's see. And then lastly, we're up in Westfield now in Orleans County on the main stem of the Missisquoi. And there's two major tribs that come in there, Taft Brook and Millbrook. And here's just provide some context. Excuse me. The pink, sorry, wrong pipe. The pink is the current project. And as context, we have past projects in CREP. So this area, we have a lot of CREP going on. This is another farm. This is Taft Brook trib that was planted, I think, in 2018. Another older project, much older. There's a river quarter easement on this whole field taken out of production, and the river has a bolst through that. I know it's hard to see, but yeah, so the pink is the O'Donnell project. This is a Vermont Land Trust River Corridor project. But so is also this green is another VLT farm that did a river corridor, and we're doing that for equip because the landowner couldn't wait to have CREP come back online again, and so that's we're partnering with NRCS and PFW to make that basically happen through equip/PFW and MRBA. Yep, and MRBA. Lindsay White has the funding for that. So basically, it's three entities. Basically equip, MRBA covering half and half, and PFW their typical 10% they would cover for CREP. And then this is another river corridor and CREP site on another BLT farm. So that's the setting. A lot of good stuff happening here in Westfield and Troy. This is just showing it with the river corridor on, but so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 farms, river corridor easements and buffers. Yeah, so this project's 29 acres. A lot of it's on the main stem, but we also have a good chunk on, this is Millbrook coming in, and this is Taft Brook. And I'll show some slides of everything, but I mean, this is kind of where this is most fun, I think, this section of Taft Brook, because we also taking this whole look field out of production. There's an old channel that had crossed when this flooded through and kind of gouged out some soil there, and it's just a really wet field. So we'll be able to do some wetland restoration along with CREP there. And there's a couple places where we're going beyond, like this is actually like a 65-foot buffer here from here over to here, just because of the amount of movement on the stream there. This is that area. There's is quite a bit of adjustment still going on. And this is like 3 years ago now, so just some of the setting for the main stem. There's basically either a thin buffer, no buffer, or just a few trees with some still active erosion. This is, cornfield with our cover crop, looking north, downstream. This is on the Trib, Millbrook. And this is Taft Brook, smaller, Trib, but still sizable. It's nothing you're gonna hop over. There is a lot of beaver activity coming in, which will be interesting in terms of a planting aspect. It can be a challenge, but it also, I think, will add a lot to the site once we can get things established here. And this is part of the area. You can see all the rushes growing in the field here. There's this just very wet field that we're removing that whole chunk from production. Let's see, yeah, that's also Taft Brook. And I just wanted to sort of stress, I always try to throw these slides out that it's the, the act that for me, where I'd like to focus is on the smaller tribs. I mean, it's great to do these river projects, but in terms of water quality, bang for the buck, it's the headwaters are where it's at. You just get a lot more benefit to the main stem, because I like this visual as well, just showing that it's the protection of these smaller tribs are much more effective. They're the lungs of the river in a way, and the quality of those tributaries determines basically in a large part the quality of the river, the water in the river. So anyway, I'd like to mention that, and I'll let Katie jump in here and just tell me, go ahead and move the slide, Katie. Just showing some of the new techniques we're trying on some projects for site prep and before planting.
Great, thanks, Ben. And you might need to go on mute. I think I'm hearing myself echo back. Thanks. So just a couple pictures. Ben mentioned how we partner on these projects, that we provide 10% of the implementation costs. And then we're also, as much as we can, we're trying to build in more capacity to do more work on these projects. So this is building off of the work that Annalise and Pete and Fritz have been doing with site prep for direct seeding and buffers. And we're also trying to do some of this pre-planting vegetation control, whether it's for direct seeding or for planting trees, just to reduce the competition and to help the project be as successful as possible. So this year we were able to purchase some equipment to start moving some of that forward. Then you can start flipping through these. So we got a UTV with a boom sprayer. to hit some of this vegetation before planting. One of the things we've seen is that grass and vines come in after these projects and climb up over the trees. Ben, I don't know if you can move these pictures forward. I don't know, I'm still seeing this one, but anyway, this is just kind of to explain some of the extra stuff that we're doing on these projects and kind of the adaptive management that we've started building in to try to improve success on the ground. And before we leave CREP, I just wanted to encourage everyone, you know, when you have a project that has agricultural use, this is a really great program. There's not much out there that could do something like this, that offer full installation of these buffers at no cost to the landowners and also provide the rental payment. So, you know, when you have something, whether, you know, you might not know if it's a fit or not, but I would just encourage folks to get in touch with Ben and Phil because it's a really great benefit to the landowner. And I am going to switch into just a little bit more of an overview about who I am and who I work for outside of the CREP partnership. Ben, if you can stop screen sharing, then I can try to share my screen here. Are folks able to see this? Great. And it looked like right at the end there, a picture showed up showing the mower that we also got. So we're trying to be nimble and to be able to use manual and chemical methods, whatever a site might call for. So the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is the private lands restoration program of the service. So we can work on town-owned land, state and federal land we're not able to work on. And the mission of our program is to provide financial and or technical assistance to landowners and our partners. The funding for project implementation that we do comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from our annual budget and also through some supplemental funding that we have through the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. And the mission, it's very uncommon that we do a project that stands alone. We're very much built to partner with local organizations. So Michelle gave a really good example of how this works, that, you know, we all are able to combine our funds together to get more projects on the ground and to expand our collective expertise to work in more places across the state. So within the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, I focus on riparian restoration projects. I'm not going to talk about the other work that we do other than to just say it's out there. We have other biologists in our office who focus on wetland restoration and also fish passage. So if you have projects that might fall under those categories, definitely reach out to us and we're happy to chat about those. So obviously, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, our focus is on the wildlife of these projects. But one of the reasons that I think this partnership has been so effective, and Annalise mentioned in her intro that we've been doing this for over 20 years now, is that there are these really great multiple benefits of riparian buffers. So a lot of our partners might have a little bit more of a water quality focus, or their funding source might be water quality based, you know, focused around TMDL and the lake and phosphorus reduction. But a lot of these projects also provide really important habitat. So we can provide some expertise for building that into these projects. And from our standpoint and from our program's mission, we're not a funder, but we're a partner. And so we, like I said, can offer financial or technical assistance to projects. The financial assistance is always dependent on funding levels and also some of our wildlife priorities. But generally, again, as Michelle demonstrated, we can offer a share of the plant material cost, and for a lot of the Trees for Streams type projects or projects through WOV, we're splitting that plant material cost, but we're also really flexible. So we're not, a lot of funding sources it has to pay for the tree or it has to pay for the development. We basically, we want the project to be a success. And so we can be flexible with what the needs are and kind of fill in as needed. And more, we're focusing on being able to provide some of the follow-up that's needed for these projects, as we've seen more and more of that. And I'm always available, Annalise and I both, as a technical assistance resource. As Annalise mentioned, we had a 10-year monitoring project going out and looking at projects across the state. And so we have kind of our fingers in a lot of different projects, and we see a lot of stuff across the state. So we're always available to talk about species selection and survival trends that we're seeing, and just to give maybe some of that broader statewide perspective. In 2020, just to give a snapshot, we're partnering on 30 projects, and that's with a lot of people here today across 6 watersheds, and that comes out to 200 acres. That is a little higher than a typical year because we're helping to support CREP re-enrollments, which is something Ben didn't really get into, but some of those projects that are now 15 years old that are able to be re-enrolled, and there's an opportunity there to kind of supplement the habitat and come in and plant some additional stems into those. And like I said, we're very much built to be flexible, and we kind of follow the needs of the wildlife, but also the needs of the projects as we learn more and see what project needs are across the state. So we've been expanding our capacity to be able to provide more of this pre-planting site preparation and post-planting maintenance to improve project success. And so like we started with at the beginning, that was buying some equipment last year, and we're hoping to be able to build in some staff to be able to be out on sites, kind of running that stuff through the summer and provide more of that follow-up. So with that, I'm always here as a resource, whether it's a project that we're involved with financially or not. I'm always happy just to chat and to provide some technical assistance to folks. So if you don't know me, I'd encourage you to reach out. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben and Katie. There were a couple questions in the chat that didn't get answered. You guys can feel free to scroll up and find those, or if they don't get answered, I'll keep an eye on it. We can address them when we do questions in a little bit. So next up, we've got Will Eldridge from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. Will, I think you're muted if you've started speaking.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to do this all at the same time. I'm used to Zoom, to Teams, not so much used to Zoom. Can you at least see? Oh, I can do it. Right. There it is. My controls just shifted screens. Let's see. All right, how's that? Can you?
It's great. We can hear you and we can see your slides.
You can see the slides. All right, cool. No, thank you so much for organizing this, Allison and Annalise, and for inviting me to represent the department. This is a great opportunity. Riparian areas are very important to the department. We manage aquatic and terrestrial wildlife in the state, and riparian areas are important for both of those, both fish and wildlife side of things. And so, very important issue for us. The other thing is, we're actually like a relatively small program, so we don't have a lot of capacity to do a lot of the work ourselves. So we really depend on working with partners to do this work. So this opportunity to engage with partners and to talk about this type of stuff is great. I really appreciate that. The other thing I just wanted to highlight is, this is a challenge in the state. I recognize that, but for us, like, we emphasize protection over restoration. And so that's just something, I throw out there as like an ongoing challenge. Like, it's much easier to protect an intact riparian area than it is to restore it. You know, as Katie was showing with all that work that they're doing, you know, with herbiciding and mowing and whatnot, like, and Ben mentioned with, you know, reed canary grass, like, it's really hard to reestablish a riparian area, you know, riparian forest. So, you know, protection is important. And so that's something, you know, that we'd like to figure out, you know, just a dialogue that we'd like to engage in down the road is how to kind of boost that side, that aspect of the program. The other thing I was going to say is just a big overview of what the state Fish and Wildlife Department offers in terms of these kinds of programs. So there is some funding that we can offer, you know, technical assistance. We also have a program that helps municipalities with planning, so town planning and zoning, which I'll get into. The other thing that we're interested in is coordination. So, you know, opportunities like this, you know, how can we like leverage each other's resources and you know, make the sum bigger than the individual parts. You know, something else we're looking into now is monitoring and research. You know, some people have touched on this, like, you know, the importance of actually going back and not just following up on these projects, you know, the planting inside of, you know, that side of things, but actually like collecting data to better understand what works and what doesn't. And so this summer, we're going to have some staff going out looking at some of our planting projects to do some monitoring and begin to collect more information on that. That's something I actually want to follow up with some of you guys to see what you've been doing, just to develop a monitoring plan. The other thing the state has is land. We own, you know, thousands of acres, a lot of it on streams and rivers, and you know, not all of it is forested. And so we work with partners to do plantings on state lands when it makes sense. You know, something else that we're interested in helping with is education and outreach. You know, where are there opportunities that either using state lands as demonstration sites, or, you know, other opportunities we have for education and outreach. And so, yeah, that's just a kind of an overview. You know, hopefully it's not too much. I mean, it's ambitious, but, you know, that's why we have partners. All right, so let's see. First kind of specific I wanted to talk about was the watershed grants. So this is a, you know, funding opportunity that is made available through the conservation license plates. So there's deer, trout, and loon license plates. So there's money available for education, planning, and implementation. You know, it's for a variety of projects that meet water quality and habitat needs. So it's not just riparian tree plantings, but riparian plantings are eligible. And so with this, what's nice about this funding source is it can be used not just for the implementation, you know, buying material, but the other aspects, you know, actually working with landowners and you know, educating landowners, things like that. Unfortunately, the grant deadline just passed. It was February 5th of this year, so there won't be another grant round for another year. But just want to, if you're not aware, this is a funding source that's available to partners for riparian work. Another project that we're doing right now is this wetland acquisition and restoration funding. So this is money from the EPA for clean water funding that the Fish and Wildlife Department has specifically to acquire land that's been converted and to hydrologically restore it. So restoring wetlands by, you know, ditch plugs or berm removals and things like that. So the first piece is the acquisition. The second piece is then the restoration side of things. So actually restoring wetlands and the natural community, which is the forested area, you know, the plant community. For the fishery, on the fishery side of things, our priority areas are going to be headwaters that support trout. And so this map here is showing the lake. It's Lake Champlain only. That's the other thing to know about this. Lake Champlain only. And this map shows the trout waters in the state, either brook trout only, which is the native species. I'll be talking more about that tomorrow. Or what we call mixed wild trout, which includes brown and rainbow trout, which are both been stocked extensively in the state, and now we have natural self-sustaining populations. of those, which we also manage for. But anyway, so those are the kind of the priority areas. And then what we have, there's another highlight for these, what are called B1 fishing waters. And these are waters that are protected, or candidates for protection under the water quality criteria. And so those are kind of like exceptional trout waters, if you will. We're going through the state identifying those B1 waters. So there's a bunch of gaps in here. It's not because those don't meet the criteria, it's just that those haven't been assessed yet. But you know, we're prioritizing those B1 waters. That's where we see like the healthy populations. And you know, what we're trying to achieve is maintaining those healthy populations. And so, you know, this acquisition funding is a way to do that. It's one of the tools in the toolbox for protecting and restoring those aquatic habitats. And so what we're looking for from partners, is, if you're able, is working with landowners. So, you know, there's a lot, on the wildlife side, they're working quite extensively on the Otter Creek and near some of the WMAs and kind of the lower floodplain, the lower Champlain Basin. You know, the fisheries side, we're looking more at these headwater areas. But anyway, so just, yeah, helping with outreach to landowners. Another program that the department runs is this community wildlife program. This is run mostly from the wildlife side of things, but just wanted to highlight this. So this offers free services to municipalities and NGOs, helps with town planning and zoning. They go through this iterative process of data collection and interpretation, kind of helping towns and municipalities kind of understand their resources, both from wildlife as well as land use and, you know, forest areas and forest blocks, and kind of how it fits into the bigger picture. You know, mostly focused on wildlife connectivity. You know, so it's based on this Vermont conservation design. Riparian areas are highlighted in there, but there's no like priority riparian areas per se. It's just, you know, they're all important. The other is it can also help with regulatory and help municipalities with regulatory and non-regulatory tools. So not just, you know, town planning, but, you know, there are other incentives that towns can bring to work with landowners. And then zoning is also an important one. You know, as parcels, like parcel size there's an interesting trade-off with parcel size with the whole zoning thing. It's actually much more complicated than you think. And then the other issue is connecting municipalities with partners. So, you know, as I've been saying, nobody really does this by themselves, and so this is another just way that we help bring the towns and municipalities and the partners together. Something else I've been working on is this pamphlet. It's called Fish Grow. I call it Fish Grow on Trees. It's a quick guide for waterfront landowners, but basically it just gives like it's a you know, simple summary of like why it's important to protect trees in your riparian area. There's a glossy version of this. Last year, with a bunch of you provided input on updating this, and so this year we're going to update it and make this available again. Another resource that we produced is this planting guide for the revegetation of riparian areas in Vermont. So this is more like a technical, you know, for practitioners guide. It's something that we share a lot with through our Act 250 process. You know, it's more of a regulatory process that we're protecting riparian areas. And so this is just another resource out there. I highlight it just in case you're not aware, but I think this is another opportunity for partners. Maybe we could look at revisiting this technical guidance and maybe updating it. You know, it's from 2016, but it already feels a little dated. So anyway, just if this is something that people feel is valuable, I think this is, you know, something else we could update. And then lastly, there's not too much to say here. Anyway, there's Streamwise is this, maybe it's ambitious, program that it's funded through the Lake Champlain Basin program. It's an effort with both New York and Quebec and Vermont. And there's kind of this two-tier approach, the way I see it. So first is working on these landowner incentives. And so it's creating these non-financial incentives for private landowners, kind of people that are missed through like the agricultural communities, or large, or like UVA or any of the larger landholders. So this is kind of aimed at more smaller landowners, and it's really just like acknowledging that, hey, you're doing the right thing. It's kind of using this like social reward system is kind of the basis behind it. And encouraging people to protect and restore their riparian area. The other kind of social community aspect of it is it's fostering these watershed communities. And so the idea is that if you're trying to reach a landowner, the most effective messenger is actually somebody else in their community. So it's not going to be us at the state, and may not even be a watershed partner or conservation district. It may be somebody in their community. And so the idea is that we're identifying these community members that can sort of be advocates, for the stream and river and for the riparian area. And so what this program will do is kind of recognize those people who are doing the right thing, give them a certificate, and really just like that physical certificate is like, people want it, and they're gonna ask like, how did you get that, and what do I have to do? And it's basically through that kind of like word of mouth is the idea. And so I've been told from the Lake Champlain Basin program that they're gonna pilot this. We're in the process of still developing the program, but they're gonna pilot in 2 watersheds soon. I don't know if it's this summer or next summer, but just stay tuned for that. The second aspect is this coordinating the messaging. So there's this like watershed community-based idea is one level, but the other is there's all of us already doing a lot of outreach to landowners, and I think what would be valuable is if we were all using the same messaging. And so this is something I've been thinking about, but yeah, just developing that. And so just be aware that it's something that I'm thinking about. I'm working with some partners to kind of develop a plan for that. And so we're talking about maybe in the fall reconvening a group of like a meeting like this to kind of bring together, like figure out what to do, like how but anyway, just stay tuned. But the idea being like, if we're all saying the same thing, then it's going to be more effective. Like the idea, it takes somebody needs to hear a message 7 times before it sinks in. And so if we're all kind of using the same thing, I don't know exactly what this means. I'm not a marketer or whatever. Like I don't know if it's so. Anyway, like but it just seems important. And I think that's all I got. So yeah, short and sweet.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you, Will, for covering all of those many things. That was really great.
All right, how do I stop share? Okay, cool. Yeah,
you got it. So the last update that we have for this session, and then we'll take questions for this round of updates, is Alaire Diamond with Vermont Land Trust.
Great. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Alaire Diamond. I am an ecologist with Vermont Land Trust, and I just wanted to share some things that my colleagues and I are working on regarding buffers, riparian work, and wetland restoration work. So just this slide just has a quick overview of kind of where we are as an organization. So Vermont Land Trust holds conservation easements on over 2,000, mostly farm and forested properties in the state. And so what's really amazing about that to me is that it's this incredible foundation of land. It's about 10% of the acreage in the state. And as Ben said earlier, we've got headwaters, the important contributions of headwaters to water quality in our watersheds, and also the mid reaches of streams, and then the main stems of our streams and bigger rivers and lake frontage as well. So we've got conserved land, most of it privately owned, in all of those parts of our watersheds. So in my mind, that's just kind of there's unlimited potential for water quality protection and improvement, restoration, and engagement with landowners and with communities around around the value of these streams. And so we work on a lot of different kinds of water quality projects. I'm going to talk mostly about buffers right now. So in the past, probably 5 years, we have standardized riparian buffers in all of our new conservation easements. So every new project that closes has a standard 50-foot buffer on perennial streams on that property. And I think, Ben, you mentioned that as well, which is just something that is really important. It may involve the landowner taking part of that land out of production if it was in production before. And when that happens, in the conservation process for our new projects, which we close about 20 to 25 farm projects and 15 to 25 forest land projects per year. On all of those projects, we identify places where there are gaps in forested and naturally vegetated riparian areas through a surface water planning process. And so in that process, we identify needs for planting. In many cases, those reaches are already forested, but when there are needs for planting, we work with a huge variety of partners, many of whom are on this call, and many of whom have spoken today about specific projects that we're working on together, or that we have worked on together. So that's just something that we, in the last few years, have really made kind of universal on all of our new projects. In the past, we would do that on larger streams, but we now have this opportunity to do it on all perennial streams. And along with that, with a more comprehensive focus on riparian protection, we are actively pursuing overlay easements on older conservation projects. So Vermont Land Trust easements, the Land Trust started in 1977. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of easements that don't actually have buffer protection in them. So there's an opportunity to go back and add an overlay to those easements if the landowner is interested, if the right conditions are there. So when we do that, then we have really exciting opportunities to look not only at buffers, but at wetland protection and other ecological protections as well, potentially for upland natural communities of state significance that might be on that property. But I would say our buffer and wetland protection is one of the main sort of water quality protections we put on those overlays. We, in the last year, have developed a tool that allows us to calculate the value of agriculture and forest land use. That is something we use with these overlays to be able to compensate the landowner for the value of the land that they might be giving up in that overlay. And that's a really important tool. It's something that we have worked on and shared with a lot of partners as well. It's based mostly on, well, almost entirely on soil, agricultural soil type, and land use. And we can look at immediate recent history land use as well to come up with a value for that land. It's then confirmed by an appraiser. This is a appraisal-based tool that was developed by one of the appraisers that we work with. And then we can seek funding for that compensation for landowners. So that's an important tool that we've been using with the state as well when we look at river corridor easements that may include wetland protection. And we're working on a project right now where we're including a wetland that's outside of the river corridor. So it's a river corridor overlay easement. There's a riparian wetland that's outside of that river corridor that we were able to use a calculator to come up with a value, and then that value was then incorporated into the river corridor payment for the landowner through the state river scientist working with us on that. So that's a great way that we've collaborated to be able to kind of enhance the outcome of that river corridor project in a way that really made a lot of sense in terms of like watershed, because this is a riparian wetland, and also work with partners to just boost the value of that project in a lot of ways. The photo here is just showing one of the small we call it the fill in the gap plantings that Vermont Land Trust does a couple a year. This is just ones where we, our staff, our AmeriCorps members are really closely involved with planning these places where our riparian buffer, like it may be in the easement, but it's not actually in natural vegetation on the ground. There's a couple a year that we will actually order plants, do the planting, and coordinate that ourselves. But these tend to be pretty small, maybe less than 200 stems. So this particular one was, I think, like less than a quarter acre. And so we will do that ourselves, but when we get into bigger plantings, we are always working with a variety of partners and using some of the funding sources that were described earlier today. Those are able to get those plantings done. I would say that we're kind of in an ongoing way seeking funding to do more riparian buffer work. In the last year, we've gotten several, through the kind of services like Katie was talking about, working with Katie, working with other partners to provide trees, we're able to have to make these projects bigger, be able to do them, to do more plants, to do more area. We've also gotten support through a NIFWIS grant that is actually called the Headwaters to Lakeshore Grant. So recognizing the positioning of conserved land in all parts of the watershed, and the Memphremagog and Champlain watersheds. So we have funding through that, and we're always kind of looking for new sources so we can do more of this work. Let me see if I can move my next slide here. Sorry, I think I just kicked you guys off. Let's see. Okay. Nope, looks like we're still here. So, sorry, I had some technical issues there. Like I said, we do some of these smaller plantings just on our own, but when we do bigger projects, we're always working with partners. This is a project that was a wetland and riparian planting down in Springfield along the Connecticut, or near the Connecticut River. Partners including Partners for Fish and Wildlife, watershed groups, Trees for Streams, CREP, Conservation District partners. This particular project was done with a group of students from the Springfield High School Technical Center, the River Valley Technical Center. Ryan Crayon is up in the middle of the picture there, from Partners for Fish and Wildlife, who planned and really coordinated this whole planting. And VLT was able to work to get the high school students to come and do it. But Ryan really did the design and the plan for that. And so we're really grateful for these partnerships. And this is one example of that. We're kind of dipping our toes into this world of follow-up maintenance for plantings. In the past year, we had a couple of really great experiences working with volunteer groups to get out and just trim and clear around trees that were planted. There's something that sometimes is something that Katie will bring to a project or another partner will bring to a project, but we are also trying to take care of our plantings and this work over multiple years. One thing I just want to share in the right-hand picture here and the bottom of that picture is this new tool that I'm kind of obsessed with. I don't know if we're getting into practical stuff. It's this very like elegant, tiny little Japanese like hand tool. It's a saw that I find is extremely effective for clearing around trees. It costs about $6, and I ordered a whole bunch of them for the Land Trust for us to use with volunteers and groups. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share that. But it's just one small, like very inexpensive and super effective tool that, you know, if you're out there trying to clear around a tree with a weed whacker, there's a danger of like hitting the tree. And this is just something that I really enjoy. So happy to share that if that's helpful for anybody else. And finally, not sure what's going on with my screen here, but I would say that, there we go. This is a wetland and riparian buffer project that we did in Sheldon, and we worked with Missisquoi River Basin Association to do the planting last year, and we'll be continuing to come back to this site over the coming years to do follow-up maintenance, but also adaptive management here. The open water you see in the middle was actually a wetland depression that was created in a field that had been, where there had previously been a wetland, and then it had been converted to agriculture. So this is our kind of first wetland restoration project that BLT really took on itself. We're pretty proud of it and wanting to make sure that it's successful into the future. So I would say that it's one example of where we take a scaled approach to our restoration and buffer work. in some cases, we're going in or we're working with partners to just make sure that trees are planted in a buffer, to make sure that the easement is actually followed, that the easement is requiring natural vegetation along those buffers. In other cases, land that we may own in short or long term, or land such as this one that's still privately owned, but where we've made a bigger investment, we are doing more adaptive management ourselves and going back in and working to just hopefully enhance the function of those areas into the future. So that's something that we're just continuing to work on and really excited about. There's a lot of opportunities there. So that is it for me. And I welcome questions or thoughts. Please reach out to me, alair@vlt.org. And again, thank you to all of you for being here today, and especially to all the partners that we work with. And I think it feels like we're just building something that gets stronger each year. So really grateful for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alair. And that is what we have for this round of updates. We've got some lightning updates coming up, shorter updates from partners. But I wanted to take a minute and have an opportunity for folks to ask questions of the people who just presented. I was keeping track in the chat of some questions that were not answered. So I think we'll start with those. And then if people would like to raise their hands or type additional questions for folks in the chat, we can spend about 15 minutes before we move on to the next section on that. So there were, Ben, there were a couple of questions specifically for you. One from Aaron DeVries asking what the average annual rental payment is for CREP projects.
It's kind of hard to say because it varies by county. The flat rate sort of for land that's not an annual crop production. But let me just give you a rough, I'd say probably from $120 to $150 per acre a year for most of the pasture hayland settings. That's averaging in the state's upfront, state and federal upfront payments plus the annual rental. And it depends on whether they have fence and stream and other practices involved or not. But for that category, that's the range they're looking at, like 120 to 150 something per acre per year. Well, maybe a little lower. One of the other aspects of having CREP eligible again with the REPs is that it's pretty small. There's a small reduction in the payment, the annual rental payment for the first 25 feet. But yeah, for overall, I'd say it's in that ballpark. If it's getting into cropland, annual cropland, corn and beans, then you're into the higher, can be at higher levels. But I won't get into that. Most of the stuff we're doing is not actually on annual cropland. I mean, a smaller percentage is, but it varies by the soil type, by the county, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. And then there was another question from Eric Sprague with American Forest. He was wondering if an owner of land in the program can renew their contract.
Yeah, Katie alluded to that a little bit and I didn't touch on it, but yeah, the 15-year contracts, which at the end of the contract, they are notified that they're eligible to re-enroll. And yeah, you can re-enroll for another 15 years. You're not going to get the upfront incentives or anything like that, but you'll continue to get an annual rental payment for that acreage that you've removed from production.
And Ben, can you clarify how easements work with that?
Well, yes. Good. Thanks, Katie. So yeah, that you can re-enroll if you do not have an easement, that the CREP contract, the land that's in that wasn't subsequently encumbered by an easement that requires you to have that acreage removed from production. So, a lot of the projects we are working on with VLT, that will be the case. So we call them one and done. They at least get, the first 15 years of an annual rental. soften the blow of removing that acreage from production, and then they get, again, 100% cost share with help from partners, Fish and Wildlife. So, and obviously it's in many cases a lot of the VLT projects and Upper Valley Land Trust and other land trusts, they're conserving the farm. It's part of the cost of doing a project, or the water quality benefits of the conservation easements have become a higher priority than they were, again, when the land trust started years and years ago. So it can be a bit of a trick to get contracts on timing wise before they try to conserve the farm, but we usually make it work out. So.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much for clarifying those things, Ben. Will, there were a couple of questions for you in the chat that I noticed as well that I think weren't addressed yet. So one of them from Lenny was, he was wondering whether Lakewise has been effective enough that it can be a model for Streamwise.
Yeah, I should let Amy Peacock speak to Lakewise. She's the one who manages it, but she's involved with the Streamwise technical advisory committee, and so I think we're taking we're trying to take everything we can from Lakewise, what we can, and adapt it to the Streamwise. And yeah, I mean it's definitely modeled after Lakewise. So I think I mean it depends on how you determine how you define success. I think one of the fundamental differences between Lakewise and Streamwise is Lakewise is actually managed through DEC, whereas the Streamwise doesn't really have that, one manager, one, program overseeing it, at least not yet. And so, yeah, I think, which could impact success, how quickly it spreads out and things like that. And there's some other differences, lakes are a little more amenable to this kind of community aspect, as streams, we're still trying to figure that out. So, yeah, anyway.
Thank you. And then Chris
Hello? I just want to make a comment. This is Peter Danforth from the Moyle County Conservation District. I've worked with Will and Amy on a number of things regarding both lake and river work, and I do a lot of work with Lakewise on Lake Elmore and Lake Eden. We did a major watershed assessments of both those lakes and involved the landowners there. And from an anecdotal sort of perspective, the Lakewise programs have been very successful. Each year we want more people to be more people want to be involved as they see us implement sort of best management shoreline practices. And so I'm hoping that could be translated over to rivers for sure. As Will said, the community aspect, we got to figure out how you connect those people within a watershed. But just from an anecdotal perspective, both in Elmore and Eden, it's been very successful. And the reason it's successful is that many partners get involved. And so we've worked closely with the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps to implement those. So once an assessment's been made with a landowner, then suddenly you have some free labor, if it's funded, that is, through DC or through a grant that I would have written. And then sort of, it kind of, I guess what's the word I'm looking for? It's a domino effect. Not just with the amount of people that are involved, but also with the amount of partners that want to help that landowner. So I would totally promote that paradigm moving forward.
Great. Thanks so much for chiming in on that, Peter. So there was, Will, one more question for you from Chris Stepanek. And Chris, you may have to clarify what part you're referring to, but she was wondering what, she said, might what Will suggested be the same or parallel to the RFP out with the Lake Champlain Basin program now for stormwater?
I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, Will.
Yeah, I know I've heard about it, and I think, I mean, we're focused mostly on landowners on streams and rivers. I think there's a lot of, and the stormwater is kind of taking it to, smaller watersheds and maybe more of the upland landowners. I think everybody has the vision of, like, the entire community, like everybody within a town or within a watershed, not just people on streams and rivers. You know, so we're focusing initially just on people directly on, you know, perennial streams. So I think that might be a difference, and I don't know. I'm not too familiar about the implementation, you know, the program, the stormwater program, how it's gonna.
Yeah, I was more thinking like the messaging piece in terms of like teaching people why it's important that we're thinking about these kinds of things. That's the overlap, and I totally agree that there's differences, right, in terms of like where this is done stream wise. Could be, I mean, stream side could be for these stormwater programs, or it may not be, but more in terms of the education to the people around what the message is shared. I feel like there must be overlap there, and you know, is there, I don't know, opportunity to consider as that whatever's happening with that moves forward, and what you said around common messaging.
Yeah, I mean, so just like my like secret and evil big picture for this is like, you know, so I mentioned earlier, like the state, like we, like at least in fisheries, we rely a lot on partners to actually get our work done, you know, to connect with landowners and to actually do a lot of work. And I see this model, whether it's the stormwater program or the Streamwise program, as a way to actually formalize that. So, you know, right now we're focusing just on riparian areas, but I don't see why this model of like it's really empowering the watershed group, the you know, that group as a means of getting messaging, you know, from the state and funding, you know, as well, and priorities and things like that, from like practitioners, you know, from the funding source to the people, the places where it's going to be implemented. You know, I think that's like my long-term vision. I see that Mike Klein's on here, just so he knows, like, you know, functioning floodplains, I think, could fit into this model. It's like, you know, we've got this information, we have the assessments, we know what needs to be done. Next step is connecting with the landowners and figuring out how to connect with them. And so that's kind of where I see this going in the future. You know, whether it's a the Storm Smart model or a Streamwise model, it's basically, you know, formalizing that process of getting the messaging and the funding and the you know, from the, you know, onto the ground, to the landowners, where that work is going to be, you know, where it's going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. I probably shouldn't say secret and evil on a call like this. Anyway.
Yeah, you're being recorded. Well, so thank you to everybody for those longer partner updates. Really appreciate sort of the updates on what you guys are up to, what you can expect, what we can expect to see in the coming year. We also had an opportunity for folks to sign up to give sort of lightning updates, like 5 minutes or less, about what they've been up to or announcements. And so we've got a number of those that we're going to jump into now. So the order for these, again, they'll be 5 minutes or less, but the order will be Pete Emerson, Mike Klein, Annalise Carrington, Eric Sprague, then Mandy St. Hilaire and I will talk about something, and then followed by Linda Prim and Kiana French. So Pete, if you're on the call, go ahead.
Thanks, Allison. 5 minutes or less, I can do this. I just wanted to make a couple of points about work that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is engaged in statewide. Will did a great job of explaining some of our acquisitions in the Lake Champlain Basin. I wanted folks to know that we're also using Great Lakes Fisheries Commission money to pursue acquisitions of wetlands and riparian lands, particularly those lands that are adjacent to our current ownerships in the Memphremagog Basin. You'll hear more about that from Jess today. So Fish and Wildlife, I think, is kind of really recently engaging in acquisition and habitat restoration in certain areas because of a kind of a windfall of funding. So the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission money that Katie mentioned earlier has been expanded east into Lake Memphremagog. We are now the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're the 7th Great Lake, if you didn't know that. Lake Memphremagog is now part of the same funding resources that allow international joint management of lamprey control in the Great Lakes between Ontario, between Canadian provinces and United States states. That has been expanded into Vermont, and we are really grateful for that funding, and we're able to use that in a myriad of different ways, including restoration and acquisition. So as you're working in the Lake Memphremagog Basin, please be aware that we have resources, and we're, as Katie mentioned earlier, we're very interested in partnering and cost sharing, because that leverage is really what makes a small project a very meaningful large project. So our acquisition process will be just explained a little bit in the slideshow that Jess is going to give later. And one of the methods that we're implementing, I think Annalise is going to cover nicely in a presentation that she'll be giving later, talking about hydroseeding and direct seeding. So I don't want to dig too much into that, but I did want to just mention that we are actively involved in some acquisitions, working with Ben and the VHCB in Morgan, Vermont. So if farm buyouts are something that is counted in this grand scheme of riparian buffers, know that we do that as well. So as you see projects opening up and you're looking for partners and you're wondering where the money is going to come from, just be aware that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is a partner that you can turn to. We may be able to help. Another thing that we're really excited about is this expansion of our floodplain forest restoration process. And we are going to be the proud owners of a tractor, which will allow us to do a lot of site prep. And that's something that I wanted this group to know, that that's something that we're doing statewide, starting to get the ball rolling on reclaiming former ag fields. That's really the only sweet spot that this works well in at the scale that we're proposing, because it needs to be a field that's kind of not rocky and not already forested or partially forested. So when you're looking at restoring tree species in a former ag field riparian area, please consider reaching out to myself or to Will or Annalise, and we can maybe help initiate that project. And that in less than 5 minutes is kind of what I wanted to say. So thank you for the time.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Pete. Easily under 5 minutes, no problem. All right, Mike Klein, we have from Fluvial Matters talking about the Functioning Floodplains Initiative. Mike.
All right, I'm going to try to share my slide. Can people see it? All right.
Yes, we can.
Well, let's see. Go back to the beginning. Functioning Floodplain Initiative. It's an effort that is being spearheaded by the DEC. And, I'm working with an incredible crew of folks. Gretchen Alexander, who I think is on the call, she's leading the river scientist at the DEC's program that's spearheading this. And I'm working with a number of consultants that many of you know who have been working in riparian and stream and floodplain restoration for many, many years now, and a whole suite of faculty and graduate students, undergraduate students at UVM that are all kind of working to pull this together. It's a project that is intended to improve flood resiliency, restore water quality, and enhance riparian, in-stream riparian and floodplain habitat. It's a full planning process that will come to play in a web-based application, mapping and planning, set of mapping and planning tools that will start out with an analysis of connectivity, how connected are our streams laterally to the areas within their river corridors and floodplains. Vertically, how connected is the stream with its floodplain and groundwater. Longitudinally, upstream to downstream, how connected are the flows, as well as temporal connection, which is the timing and quantity and duration of flows in the watershed. And the idea that all four of these connectivity types are the drivers of the critical stream and floodplain processes of erosion, deposition, and inundation that really govern how our riverscapes function and the values, the water quality, flood resiliency, and habitat values that we're all interested in restoring. Right now, we are going through that analysis, just finishing up the connectivity analysis, preparing to bring in some really state-of-the-art research on sediment and nutrient, movement and storage within the watershed. And we have completed then going on to an opportunity, what we're calling an opportunity analysis, where we're looking at almost 40 different project types, including the Riparian River Corridor and floodplain reforestation projects, to understand where are the greatest opportunities to do these projects. What are the constraints that are on the landscape that affect the feasibility of these projects? We're rating the feasibility for projects. We're then going to translate that into the status of these functions, these erosion, deposition, and storage related functions. And finally, the benefit cost that would be gained from doing these projects with respect to, for instance, phosphorus load reduction, savings on the cost of damages related to erosion, flood-related erosion and inundation, and hopefully in the future, habitat values. All of these various screens, the feasibility, the connectivity, feasibility, and benefit costs will be used as screens to identify the priority of these various project types at the reach scale for people to then go through and develop what we're calling these project planning tables, where you can select screen projects by project type, by the types of functions that you're interested, functions and values that you're interested in, by feasibility, et cetera, to create these work plans on projects. I believe the state is really looking forward to using the functioning floodplains tools as a way to come up with the load allocations for clean water service providers and basin water quality councils with respect to some of these, river and floodplain type projects. In terms of, how many pounds of phosphorus might be gained, what are the co-benefits of these various projects that might be funded through state and federal clean water dollars. And then I think really importantly, the Functioning Floodplains Initiative is going to allow project planners to track the status of projects as they go forward and provide a whole set of reporting tools so that we can communicate the progress that's being made in improving water quality or flood resilience or ecological integrity associated with these various practices. I think all along, the most valuable tools that we can create are the ones that ultimately affect the policy, the state policies, and program development, and importantly, the funding for all these types of practices that we've been talking about today. And I think the goal is that the functioning floodplain tools will really enable the state and all of its partners to explain the value of these projects in terms of the state's values in our rivers and floodplains. This is just another way of expressing that cycle, a little bit more detail, explaining how the connectivity and process will be used to evaluate functions and ultimately values, and where we've lost those functions, what are the feasible projects for restoring, and as important, Will mentioned the importance of protection. Where are these functions currently, robust but threatened, and that would benefit or should be priorities for conservation and protection? I've listed some of the general project types, restoration and protection projects. here, but for the purposes of this meeting, I really wanted to emphasize that, you know, the team is looking at the status of 50-foot riparian buffers, you know, restored wetland vegetation, the opportunities for reforesting river corridors, as well as floodplains, and what would be the benefit cost of those projects. So, you know, that's the Functioning Floodplains Initiative overview. And again, we're about a year out, I think, from having much of this planning tool put together for beta testing. We anticipate, or that a part of the contract is to get out there and hold training sessions with all of you, and you know, hopefully have you all be active participants in using this tool and helping the DEC and ANR, you know, maintain the data and keep it as a relevant tool for watershed planning. So, you know, that's it. You know, I just wanted, on a personal note, express that, you know, it's really heartening to see, you know, how much effort all the organizations, all of you, are putting into this. You know, I've been at this for a long time. 1992, 1993, we put together the first riparian and shoreland buffer conference we held in Richmond, Vermont. So almost 30 years has gone by since these meetings have been taking place, and I don't think we could have imagined back then just what a tremendous effort is going into these practices statewide by all of you. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for the update on the Functioning Floodplains Initiative, Mike. Next, for a brief update, we have Annalise Carrington.
Hey again, everyone. I can keep this pretty short, but I wanted to put in a plug for a series of, we're calling them stakeholder conversations, that the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program and the UVM Watershed Forestry Partnership are planning to co-host this year, really digging into plant material sourcing and production in the state. And some of you might have just seen an email that Allison and I got out yesterday through the new Watershed Forestry listserv. And if you're not yet on that or didn't receive that, let us know. But basically the idea is to, well, the reason that we're wanting to do this is, you know, as the number of partners engaging in this work is growing, and just the number and scale of riparian and wetland projects continue to grow, plant material sourcing has become an increasing challenge for partners. So we're wanting to first conduct a needs assessment to really clarify current and projected plant material needs over the next 5 or 10 years. And there was a survey embedded in that email for those of you that do purchase plant material to fill out. And if for your organization, just pick one person that would be the most appropriate to fill that out to try to avoid redundancy if possible. And then with that, we're planning to connect with existing growers and also new or interested growers to really to think about current production and what the limitations and challenges are to growth right now, and hopefully use that information to support existing growers and recruit and inform some new growers, and maybe identify some potential funding or new partnerships that could really support that happening. So this is more of a stay tuned, but if you are someone that's purchasing plant material, look for that survey, and we're asking folks to fill it out by April 5th if possible. And then we'll be starting to reach out to existing and newer interested growers too. Probably starting with some smaller, more focused conversations, and then expanding that. But that's the update there.
Great, thanks so much, Annalise. And yes, if you want to get on the Watershed Forestry Partnership listserv, please just send me an email and I'll be happy to add you. I also did put the survey link in the chat. And just to reiterate, please just have one person from your organization fill it out just to ease the analysis process. All right, next we have Eric Sprague with American Forest.
Hello, everyone. Reforestation is having a bit of a moment globally here in the US with the UN Decade of Restoration that Annalise mentioned earlier, the Bond Challenge and the 1 trillion tree movement happening globally. A lot of awareness about the role forests can provide with climate change, water quality, and biodiversity. So many organizations, companies, agencies are getting together to think through how can we scale up to meet this moment and to reforest across the country in places that are appropriate to help meet these ambitious goals. One of the first questions I think when this started up is, well, is there even enough space for all these trees that organizations are proposing? The second one, Annalise, is where are these trees going to come from? But this is the first part of it. So TNC and American Forest got together to produce reforestationhub.org as a data viewer to look at some analysis led by Susan Cook Patton at TNC that assessed reforestation opportunities across the country. Essentially, it's looking at, it was a spatial assessment, looking at suitability for land for trees that was historically in trees. Lots of effort was taken to make sure we weren't recommending reforesting grasslands in the Great Plains, for example, in Texas. And more information on the methodology we can talk about later. But here's the data tool I wanted to show it to you. Across the country, there's 133 million acres of reforestation opportunity. In the West, that's driven primarily by wildfire, post-burn. In the East, there's a lot of opportunity on pasture lands, for example, that are identified in this analysis. Of course, a real reforestation opportunity is dependent on a lot of things, of producers' goals, of woodland owners' goals. But we just took the opportunity to say, broadly speaking, where are there opportunities to plant trees that would fit local ecological conditions? And so this tool allows you to dive into these opportunities across the US. You can also select a state, like Vermont. Maybe this is not all that surprising to you, but it gives you a chance of where the reforestation opportunities are in the state. 536,000 opportunities identified by the tool. You can scroll down and see summary data on each of these opportunities by sort of land type and disturbance. You can see the opportunities that are distributed across. Also by ownership, federal, state, private lands dominate. No surprise to you, I'm sure. You can also use the tool by county and to sort by total opportunity or by floodplain opportunities for reforestation. You can also sort this by ownership, by county, acres, carbon sequestration potential, and some tree conversions based on average tree planting densities, region to region. So you can look at all this data. You can download this summary table on Excel. You can also download the GIS data. We chose to aggregate opportunity into a county level just to provide some broad-based sort of regional prioritization. But you can use the GIS data and combine it with other cool opportunities like the Forest Floodplain Initiative and other things that were being discussed earlier. So a great tool. You can find the data methodology, download it here, and check it out yourself at reforestationhub.org. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Eric. That's a really cool tool. Already opened it in my internet browser to poke around in it a little later. All right, so Mandy St. Hilaire with Propagate Ventures, though many of you may know her formerly from ICN, and I are here to talk about a really new exciting thing that we're up to. So you may have noticed that the RSVP form that many of you filled out was not a simple form where I just asked if you were coming and got your email address. We also asked you a few questions about who you work with and what the roles that organization or agency or business plays in the riparian forest restoration process. And the reason we did that is because we're hoping to create a map of sorts of the actors who sort of play in this space in Vermont and what their roles are and start to think about how those things are interlinked, and also be able to use that information to do even more efficient and effective work. So for example, I was recently having a conversation with some folks about just the instability of funding for reforestation for riparian buffer restoration projects, and how we can make that funding source, the conversations we could have to make those funding sources just a little bit more stable and predictable for people doing planning, since you do have to plan a ways out for restoration projects. And one of the things we thought about during that was just making sure that we have all the people who actually do serve as funders for these projects at the table. And I know that everybody here has their networks that they work with. You probably have your handful of people that you typically go to for a question on any given topic. But we thought it'd be great to know sort of who are all the people who should be involved in a conversation on a given topic, whether it's funding or riparian forest restoration best practices. And so we're trying to get a picture of who all those people are and what are all of the roles that their organizations play. So that's why we asked that question. And we're in the process of figuring out how to make that information as complete and as useful as possible. And so we started to compile that information and then realized that maybe we needed to ask some additional questions. So Mandy, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll share my screen so folks can see what that information looks like in its raw form so far.
Great, thanks, Allison. So just to reiterate a little bit of what Allison just said, is especially those of you who are in the initial riparian working group meeting back in 2019, I think it's abundantly clear that the growth of this working group is also showing that there's a need for mapping, and that need is growing. What kind of comes to mind for me through this process has been the Farm to Plate network, which I can share in the chat after I'm done talking, but that's a very extensive version of what could be, but I'll send it along to show that it could be a source for all of us to be using in a way that a lot of people have already mentioned and brought up today. And I also just want to recognize a lot of you know me because I've been working with you coordinating tree sales for the last 4 years to the Intervale Conservation Nursery. And also in lieu of the growing number of people that are going to be planting trees in Vermont, Propagate Ventures is where I work now, and we're part of, we're going to be also planting trees and participating in this work. So just a update on who Propagate Ventures is as I transition. It's an agroforestry analytics and product development platform. Simplifies the financial, business, and technical services that farmers need to integrate fruit, nut, and timber trees into existing operations. So as many of you know, there's a lot of benefits to planting trees, and even in an agroforestry setting, you have the co-benefits of improved water quality, increased wildlife habitat, and increased soil carbon sequestration and soil health. So from a whole farm approach, something that I've been really front of mind for me, knowing a lot of my passions are here planting trees in Vermont, is that my hope is that we can take our work planting riparian buffers and apply the benefits of buffers beyond that edge. So that's what's remaining front of mind for me as I continue tree planting here in Vermont in a just slightly different sense. So now to talk about what that survey that Allison sent out currently looks like, and this is point 0 for this work in progress. So essentially what we're doing is just creating a Gantt chart, seeing where there are possible gaps that we could be all talking about, and where there's, where people are working in. So two categories that weren't in the initial survey were farmer and landowner engagement and outreach, and policy development, which came up because some of you actually put that in as an other. So you'll notice in a survey we're going to send out again, which should only take a couple of minutes, that those will be included, but we just ask that if there's any categories that you feel like are missing, to just drop them into this chat and we'll add them in. One of them is invasive species management can fall under stewardship, but it might be valuable to also separate that, since not everyone that's offering services and stewardship is also doing invasive species management, as an example. And so one other question that you're going to see on this survey is how you feel like this information would be best utilized, and in what that format would look like. So that's just a question we want to pose to everyone, because if this is going to be mapped out, we want to make sure it's actually in a usable format for everybody. And this has a possibility of being a really great template and just source of what Vermont is doing in terms of riparian buffer management, knowing that probably if you were to compare us to many states throughout the country, being such a small state and knowing that there's over 60, 70 people on this call is pretty amazing. And to be able to pinpoint how we can utilize each other and outside of just this one meeting every year, I think is going to be really valuable.
So yeah, Mandy, I couldn't have said it better myself. And I will be sending out that updated, very brief, I hardly even want to call it a survey because I know it sounds like there's a lot of surveys floating around. Just a quick couple of questions when I send out a sort of like, thanks for today and looking forward to the meeting tomorrow sort of email later today. So look for that in that email. And if you have any questions about this or ideas about how this could be used or structured, definitely feel free to reach out to me and Mandy. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And so for our last update of today, we have Linda Prim and Kiana French from the Intervale Conservation Nursery.
Hi, this is Linda Prim, and most of you are new to me, and I'm assuming I'm new to you. So I'm actually the new manager of the Intervale Conservation Nursery, but I come over here from the agricultural crop world. I was the fruit and vegetable technical advisor for Nova Vermont 2013 to 2015, and got very involved at that time in working with Vermont farms to store sediment nutrients and organics and do soil stabilization and productive riparian buffers for climate mitigation and resilience on farms. And I have about 30 years or so experience in the West and in the Northeast in agroforestry on farms, agroforestry design, and integrating that with cropping systems. And so I really hope to bring a lot of that to ICN. And it's been really great hearing all the amazing work that's happening here in Vermont, and really excited to be part of ICN and work with all of you. So Kiana, I don't know what's happening.
Hi everyone, I'm Kiana French. I am the propagation coordinator for ICN. I'll also be fielding all of the sales from here on out. So it's been great to see everybody's face and kind of put names to faces. I know I've had a little bit of correspondence over the last few weeks with everybody. Updates on my end, we are going about business as usual. We are on track for our spring 2021 sales. And I'm looking forward to working with y'all this year. Super excited to be on board.
Thank you so much, Linda and Kiana. Really nice to meet both of you guys. Welcome to the community. That's all we have for this morning. I know that was a marathon of updates from folks. I think it's really great to know what people are up to across the state and sort of set the stage for the more in-depth conversations we're going to have about how we implement and maintain and sort of creatively approach riparian forest restoration in the next day or so. So thank you all for coming this morning. If you have questions for folks and you want to follow up, there's lots of ways to do that. Like I said before, I will be keeping this room open. So there's space for at least one conversation to be happening in here if people want to stay and chat. And I will turn off recording so you can just do that. And the